So I'm actually pretty excited about this one. Yesterday, well, really 2 days ago, my roommate purchased a 14-inch MacBook Pro, so the M1 Pro processor, SoC, whatever you want to call it. But what I was most excited about, yes, the performance of the machine, and I know she, like most people, it's not a bad thing, aren't going to utilize the chip to its full potential, which is fine. Most of us don't. And that's even for most of what I have, I'm not constantly trying to do high performance stuff. But if I do plan on maybe doing some actual video editing, it might be nice to have a machine that's a little better for that as opposed to what I currently have. And what I do know is that she has that 14-inch one. I have a M1 MacBook Air, which definitely is not really made for that. But what I did have, and then I recently sold it, was the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. And the Pro and the Air are almost identical, except for a fan. I think one more GPU core at the base models, and a touch bar. So I think, and a slightly bigger battery. So they're kind of the same thing, and that's why I'm going to compare those two. I did have an M1 Mac Mini for a while, but I've long since sold that, and that is probably no, it is essentially the guts of the M1 MacBook Pro in a desktop form feature. So it's pretty much the same thing. But I am going to just do a quick comparison because I am curious. Like, uh, do I want to spend 14-inch MacBook Pro money to get this MacBook Pro? I don't know. I really don't. But let's just draw some comparisons and see what my conclusion is. So starting at the top, we can already see one is a 14-inch and the other is a 13-inch laptop. One came out in 2020, the other came out in 2021, and we'll scroll down and we'll see some other differences. But those are the first things for me, at least. Well, I've had quite a few 14-inch laptops as of late, and I do feel that 14 inches for a laptop is kind of that sweet spot where 15, you really start changing the form factor of the machine. Same thing with 16. 13, depending on the aspect ratio of the display, feels a little too small. Like case in point, my 13-inch MacBook Air does feel fine, but I had a 13-inch Dell Latitude 7320 that just felt way too small. And that was probably because of the aspect ratio. I think it had a 16:9 screen. And I think these Macs either have 16:10. I don't think they're 3:2, but they're taller than they are wider. Well, nope, don't want to say that because they're still wider. The aspect ratio just feels better. And that leads to a machine that also feels larger. Also, when we're talking about bezels, the older machines definitely have bezels around their border. These M1 MacBook Pros and Airs, they have bezels, which means the overall um, footprint of the device is bigger, meaning a larger keyboard deck, some room for some decent size and sounding speakers. So yeah, the aspect ratio of certain devices, even if they're 13 inches, is fine. Um, but yeah, that aspect ratio is important. And for the Macs, it's fine. For other PC laptops, I have found that 13 inches is actually a little bit too small. So you can get a visual right there. Like I said, definitely bezels on the 13 inches. They've minimized those bezels on the 14 and 16 inches, but they put that notch there, which you just got to deal with it, I guess, at this point. So no need in complaining about it. It's there. Prices. So the um, when I purchased in fact, well, $1,000 is what the retail price for the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro is. Right now for Labor Day, Best Buy has it on sale for $1,600, so $400 off. On eBay, I'm finding it for around that same price, so it's like, oh yeah, why buy it used if I can go to Best Buy right now and buy it brand new for $1,600? When I purchased the MacBook Pro, I got it used for $900. So we're talking what, a $700 difference if it's used. They are on sale right now, plenty of places, because vendors are trying to get rid of them, considering the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro was recently released. So finding it for $1,000 or less is definitely something that you're capable of doing. if that's what you want. So close to, not double because, with sales and everything, but $500 to $800 more, depending on what we're looking at, is the difference between the cost of the two machines. I am definitely not going to buy this thing at $2,000, so I don't even include that as an option. But yeah, it's definitely more expensive. So I don't know. Yeah, is that something that you are willing to accept, that this machine is more powerful, has a bigger screen, but is also pretty expensive. But we'll show why, and that definitely will go into, I guess, being a little more accepting of the cost. 14.2 inches versus 13.3. The liquid Retina XDR display versus just a Retina display. So it does look really good. And I will say, yesterday we were watching Spider-Man No Way Home on my MacBook Air, and then also right next to it was my roommate's 14-inch MacBook Pro. And yeah, it does look substantially better on the 14-inch machine, which means, of course, if I still had this 13-inch MacBook Pro, it would have looked better on the 14-inch compared to the 13-inch. So yeah, screen resolution, which is we'll get into that, but it definitely just looks a lot better. You have two options in terms of chips: the M1 Pro or the M1 Max for the 14-inch, or just the regular M1 for the 13-inch. Up to a 10-core CPU for the 14 inches, whereas on the MacBook Pro for the 13-inch one, we only had the 8-core option. And on the MacBook Air, actually, it was a 7-core GPU when you started at that base model. And if you added stuff to it, then you got up to that 8-core one. But yeah, the base model for the Air was 7. The base model for the Pro was 8. When it comes to GPU, yes, you have more options for the 14-inch than you had for the 13. Same thing with RAM. You have up to 64 compared to 16. So these are things that you have to think about when thinking about your actual workflow and use cases. Is 16 gigabytes going to be enough? And granted, they talk about it's unified, so it's faster because it's all kind of integrated into the same SoC. Do you need more than 16? And yeah, depending on your workflow, the answer to that might be yes. How much storage do you need? Up to 8 terabytes versus 2. When you start adding those things, it gets pretty pricey. So I'm not even looking at 8 terabytes worth of solid state storage, even 2 terabytes now. Like, between all of my machines, I think I have about 2 terabytes. A little less. I have, what, 3? Ooh, no, right now I only have 2 Windows PCs and 1 Mac. So it's terabyte between those 2 Windows PCs, a terabyte and a quarter. When you look at that, I have, some other SSDs that aren't actively in machines right now. So yeah, definitely not even thinking about putting that much storage in one device. Battery life, and this is one of those things where I don't know if the battery physically is smaller in the 14-inch one. It's just, it's a more powerful chip, so it's going to consume more battery. Also, the screen is bigger, so using it is going to consume more power. I don't know, but 17 inches compared to 20, regardless of whatever test Apple is actually doing, that's still really good battery life for both machines. So for me, either one of those would be perfectly fine. Touch ID versus Touch ID with the touch bar. I will say that touch bar was absolute trash. Holy smokes. Now, granted, I only used it for a couple of days, and there's probably some people out there who have great use cases for it. But how I look at it is, if Apple is now saying that these 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros are truly professional grade devices, and they do not have the touch bar on them, they too are kind of conceding that, yeah, we don't need to keep the touch bar around because we don't have it on the Air, and we don't have it on our true Pro devices. We only have it on this hybrid device that we originally deemed a Pro device, which really isn't. So yeah, that touch bar was absolute trash, and I hope that whenever Apple releases another 13-inch model, if they do, which they don't, at this point, I don't think they need to, you keep your 13-inch Air around for just casual usage. But if you need a professional grade device, yeah, you're bumping up to that 14 or 16-inch model, and those are the options. No need to have that 13-inch Pro around. So the M2 13-inch Pro also has the touch bar. But yeah, I just found it to be a completely redundant piece of technology where frequently whatever, of course, you don't have the function keys. So changing screen brightness or volume of the machine requires you to interact with the touch bar. But sometimes, so to that point, it's unavoidable to use because you don't have those function keys. But also, sometimes things would pop up on the screen and they would just be duplicated on the touch bar. So it's like, yes, like case in point, every time you would go to shut down the machine, you could either, click the little apple, click shut down, and then on the screen, yeah, what pops up is the little dialog box saying, hey, do you want to shut down or cancel? But then also on the touch bar, it would say shut down or cancel. So it's like, this isn't necessary. Yeah, like this piece of hardware that you've implanted into this machine is completely unnecessary. So it's stupid. Yeah, I don't want to just blanketly say that, but the function keys do what they need to do, and they did them perfectly fine. They are on the surrounding machines. No need for the touch bar to even exist. Now, I am not going to get into the super nitty gritties about this, but essentially, to summarize it all up, the system on a chip or the SoC, whether you get the M1 Pro or the M1 Max on the 14-inch is just a better, more performant thing. And I will say the big difference, and this is probably the only big difference that I'm going to point out that might make sense to just that is most easily explained, is that when we're talking about the CPU, we see that for the 13-inch one, we have 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, meaning, hey, if you are doing lightweight stuff, those four efficiency cores really do the work. And then you're like, all right, cool. I'm not going to consume a lot of battery life. This is pretty, simple stuff to do. So we're good. It's all about efficiency, and it's half and half. Now you bump over to the 14-inch one, you see that you have up to 10 cores in total, but it looks like that ratio of efficiency to performance cores definitely is in favor of performance cores. So you were looking to do more work and more work more quickly, but in doing so consume more battery life. So that's really how I view it. Is when up top we saw that the battery life was a little different. If the SoC on the 14 and 16-inch machines had the same number of efficiency cores as performance cores, you might have seen similar battery life, but then at the same time, the task that these machines were then built to do, they might not have been able to do them as quickly as it currently does with the number of performance cores. So yeah, not even going to, if you want to go to Apple's website, by all means, take a look. RAM capacities, you get the option to have more RAM on the 14-inch model, plus the base amount of RAM on the 14-inch model is 16 gigs as opposed to 8. Same thing with storage. You get the option for more storage, and then also the base amount of storage on the 14-inch is 512 compared to 256. As mentioned before, the display on the 14-inch one, yes, is bigger. It's a mini LED backlit display as opposed to a, I guess, standard LED backlit display where the LEDs, I believe, are along the edges of the machine and they, send light through somehow. I don't know. But essentially, it allows for like blacker blacks and stuff like that. And I think a peak brightness, higher peak brightnesses. So yeah, so you are overall just getting a larger, brighter, more contrasty display when you're looking at that 14-inch one. Yes, it looks really, really good. I tell you that it looks really, really good. Looks like pixel. I'd have what's the PPI? Does it say it somewhere on here? No, it doesn't. So that would have been able just to tell me. I could do math, but I don't feel like it. So 3024 by 1964 compared to 2560 by 1600. So I'm going to assume that pixel density is greater on the 14-inch. Yeah. Color gamut, true tone. Now, here's the one thing that I'm not really sure about. This whole ProMotion stuff. So it's an adaptive refresh rate up to 120 hertz. I don't know what that means entirely. On the surface, I get what it means. The refresh rate of the screen changes while you're doing different stuff. Cool, I get it. Now, the only reason I am now unsure of it is because of how things work on Android devices. And the only reason I even say that is because you are able to have the refresh rate just plopped on the screen while you are doing stuff with these Android devices. And in fact, you know what? Let me pause this, and I'll put the refresh rate on the screen just to show you. So I just put the uh, refresh rate on the screen of the Samsung, and right now it says 60. In the settings, I changed it to adaptive, so as I move, it should change, but it's not. It wasn't, so I don't know if that's because I'm doing the screen capture or what. But essentially, as you move, see, there's 120 right there, and then boom, it plopped back down to 60. But as you move around, the refresh rate adapts to your movement. But the one thing that they constantly talk about is just the fluidity of how things move. So scrolling is one of the big things, and with the adaptive refresh rate, scrolling is much better. And if that's what's important to you, then great. But personally, and I'll stop right there. But what ends up happening is while you are watching something, that refresh rate frequently will ramp down. So normally, what would happen when I'm doing these record, or when I change when I turn on the adaptive refresh rate on this phone, and I am moving around, it says 120. But when I stop, it would plummet down to 24 hertz. And what I don't like about that is that if I'm watching a movie, I want that refresh rate to stay at 120 while I'm watching that movie. But because I physically am not interacting with the phone, regardless of what's on the screen, it will ramp down to 24 hertz. And I don't like that. Um, so does I don't know how Apple implements their adaptation of adaptive refresh rate. So is it based on what the user is physically doing with the machine? Is it based on whatever's on the actual display? Is it a combination of both? I don't know. But to avoid any of that, I would like to be able to just force 120 all the time. And with my Sony Xperia, that's what I am able to do. I just force 120 all the time. In fact, for that Xperia 5 Mark III, there isn't an adaptive option. It's just either 60 or 120. So 120 is perfectly fine. The expense at that point is battery life, but if you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. And personally, I am okay with that. So all that to say, I don't know how ProMotion truly works on the Apple products because I don't know if it's based on what the user's doing, what's on the screen, or a combination of the two. In terms of height and stuff, I mean, these things are pretty similar. The Pro is not wedge. In fact, I should say the MacBook Air M1 is wedge shape. So as you come towards the front where the keyboard is and the trackpad is, it actually gets narrower and smaller. Yeah, it comes to a point. Whereas with the Pro models, none of them are wedged. Looks like the height is about the same. The 14 inches a little bit wider, and the depth is a little bit greater for the 14 inch. Makes sense. It's about a half a pound heavier. There's a better FaceTime camera, and I'll just say there's a better webcam on the 14 inches 1080p versus 720p, so that's good. More better sounding speakers on the 14-inch one. Apparently the headphone jack on the 14-inch one is better. Keyboards are similar, and you might notice that there are more keys on the 14-inch one because it doesn't have the touch bar. So there are 13 different keys, or 13 additional keys. So that's F1 through F12. Also, the escape key, or another one. I'm not sure what else was up there. But I think they took away the escape key at one point in time. But I thought they put it back. So I don't know. But anyway, there are more keys because of the function row of keys. And that's pretty much it. Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5. The port selection, I don't know how I forgot this. So on the 12, on the 13-inch Pro, you get two Thunderbolt ports. Thunderbolt 3, they're both USB-C ports. On the left side of the machine, they're used for power, so charging the machine, data in and data out, video out as well. On the 14-inch machine, you're given 3 Thunderbolt ports, so 2 on the left, 1 on the right. You're also given the MagSafe port, an HDMI port, and a full-size SD card slot. So definitely more ports on the 14-inch one, no USB-A. I do still use it, but the devices that I plug into the USB-A ports, I mean, one is 13 years old, so definitely I could find another cable to connect it, but I'm not going to buy another cable because I'm either use a dongle or I use my PC that has USB-A ports. And that's it. And the beauty, and if I didn't mention MagSafe, the 14-inch one also has MagSafe, so another way to charge the machine that then does not occupy any of those USB-C ports. Touch bar, Apple ID, FaceTime, audio calling, Siri. Yeah, battery times. See, and here it is. So the battery physically is larger in the 14-inch machine. However, the SoC inside of that 14-inch machine is more demanding. The screen is bigger, brighter, and sometimes operates at a higher refresh rate. So it's going to consume more power. And regardless of what these stats actually say, it depends on what the user actually does. So some people will get those into the mid-teens, upper teens amount of battery life. Some might get a lot less. It really depends on what the user does. And I think that's important right there, is you have a bigger battery in a laptop, but it is slated to get less battery life or time of usage compared to the machine with a smaller battery. So really depends on what the users actually do. The option for larger USB-C chargers, fast charging is an option on the 14-inch model. And that's pretty much it. So, all in all, let's see if I can rotate this back. And yep, see, I'm going to do that. I'm quite certain it's not going to 120 because I'm doing the screen capture. But, yeah, I in my previous video, I talked about the 13 mini, the iPhone 13 mini versus the iPhone 12 mini, and I was real hesitant about getting that 13 mini because the year-over-year differences really weren't that great. But when we're now talking about these MacBook Pros, one device truly is not a professional level device, the 13-inch one, in case you weren't sure what I was talking about. Now we are talking about a professional grade device versus truly a consumer level piece of equipment. And the price difference is merited. One thing I didn't I talked about it, but I didn't, explain the differences. So let's just look at the MSRP prices. So $1,300 for the 13-inch, $2,000 for the 14-inch. But as I mentioned, the base storage and the base amount of memory or RAM are higher on the 14-inch model. So 16 compared to 8 gigabytes of RAM, 512 versus 256 gigabytes of storage. If we were to bring both of those up on the 13-inch Pro to have the same amount of RAM and same amount of storage, those individually are $200 price increases. So now we're talking $1,700 for a comparable device. So now, all right, well, what more do we get for those additional $300? Because now, yeah, storage and RAM are the same. So you get a bigger and brighter screen. You get a better webcam. You get a way more powerful SoC. You get an HDMI port, an additional Thunderbolt 3 port, MagSafe, an SD card slot, bigger, better speakers, and probably some other stuff that I just can't think of right now. But really, performance of the chip for some people is definitely going to be worth that additional $300 when we can spec these things out to be as comparable as possible. Better SoC, and then also additional ports. Definitely a huge pro for a lot of professionals. So as time goes on, I'm going to consider this machine. But even though I just talked about MSRP, frequently they're on sale. And in a few days, Apple is going to have their iPhone event. Who knows if they're going to announce any Macs? They might. And if they do, then that'll be another wrench in the equation. But after using my friend's 14-inch to watch Spider-Man No Way Home while having the 13-inch Air, even though I know it's the same display as the Pro, it just looks so nice, man. It really does. Like the display was absolutely amazing, and even though I paid after tax $700 for my Air, um, my roommate paid after taxes, but then a trade in. It'll be about $1,600 for her Pro, and then now we're talking, okay, so for an additional $800, did I do my math right? An additional $900. Hmm. Well, I mean, but we're talking used markets and sales and stuff. So yeah, mine was used, but then hers was brand new. So price aside, yeah, we have to put that caveat in there. Mine was used, hers was brand new. But um, for the additional money, yeah, she got more RAM, more storage, bigger, brighter display, more ports, and just a more capable machine. So I'm going to continue to consider it. I truly am, because I was impressed. I guess that's the best way of putting it. I was truly, truly impressed with that machine. And if you give it a try, I think you will be too.